about you, and then I will be back for however many weeks. I love the opening story. It actually, I thought, I mean, you were just being silly and mocking me, but I thought you were actually leading into the parables. That was too much to expect, I guess. But actually, it fits very nicely today, as we're going to do the parable of the Good Samaritan. And some of them are set up this way, but, priest and Levi, we're going down the road. And they're very much set up as kind of a stock way of telling a story, and then with a punchline or two, featuring one character over the other. Yeah, so that's unbeknownst, but that was actually a very nice introduction. I appreciated last week. I thought we had a good start, more of an overview of the parables, although we did spend a little bit of time looking at what I referred to as the foundational parable of the soils, setting the stage for how Jesus would like for all of us to hear all of the parables. To receive them as seed in the heart and side. But remember, the sort of main focus is not just to say, okay, those are nice stories. Kind of take them in a little bit, but the ultimate goal is some kind of life response. Doing something as a result of these stories. And as we talked in some length last week, often doing something that perhaps we're not as inclined to do. The one today is, of course, arguably the most familiar one. I'm not only going to be looking at familiar parables in Luke, we'll be looking at some of the less familiar ones. But part of the series, as you'll see from the title again on the handout, is seeing some new twists to some familiar parables. This is going to be the Good Samaritan one, and it's going to end with Jesus giving a little bit of explanation and literally saying, go and do likewise. We've got to figure out exactly what it is that he's saying do. I do think there is a twist or two that sometimes we miss. I appreciated the format last time, and I want to continue to encourage you. Some of you weren't here last week, but please feel free to interrupt and ask a question or make a comment along the way. I learned a good bit. We had a number of really nice comments, but I will stop early enough to where there's a more formal time of discussion. And then we even spilled over a little bit afterwards, those who want to hang around. So I thought that worked well and enriched all of our experiences. You know the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And we all probably have examples of how that works out. I don't think that really applies so much to the most familiar parables, certainly not the parable of the Good Samaritan. I don't think anybody despises it or looks down on it or goes. It may be that we should if we actually understood it, because there are some rather shocking dimensions. But I think there, with some of these familiar parables, the saying would be more like, we talked about some of this last week, familiarity breeds complacency. Just, I know this. You do know the basic story, of course, and I'll be narrating it again, even reading it. And you'll have Bibles. It's in Luke 10, by the way. Sometimes we don't know where it is. But it's there in Luke 10. It is unique to Luke. It's only found there. But, we got this one. What's next? Well, let's go to something more exciting. And kind of complacent. Yeah, it's okay. But it's not that exciting. Well, what I hope to do today is to lift some of that complacency, if that's where we happen to be. This won't be completely new to a lot of you, but there might be a new twist or two. What does strike me as kind of odd is that this would be the parable, if any, that even non-Christians, people who are not religious or not very active, certainly you say the Good Samaritan, and that phrase it's part of our popular culture. You don't have to be terribly initiated to know what it means and to know the basic features of it. Except just from the start, I find it curious, none of us, as far as I know, has ever met a real live Samaritan. Any more than we've met a real Philistine. Now we've met some Philistine-type people. Or a real Pharisee, same kind of thing, or a real Canaanite. There is, I haven't studied this recently, but I remember from somewhere in my studies along the way, that there is still a very small 100 or 200 surviving Samaritans left in Samaria, sort of Israel way. Of course, a few things happen in that part of the world. And I'm not sure why they lay claim to being official Samaritans, but that's not a whole lot, and they don't, I don't think they don't have a seat at the UN, as far as I know. And I think they're dying out pretty fast, yes.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Are there more parables in Luke?
Yes.
Or which gospel has?
No, actually, that's true. And I don't have an exact count. I should, since I'm still trying to finish this commentary on Luke, and have dealt with almost all the parables. Just have one in chapter 20. Yeah, but Luke clusters much more, and many more are unique to him. There's no question about that. Somewhere in the 15 to 20 range. Some of it is there's a debate about is that a story or a parable or something? But no, Luke definitely is the one. Yeah. Now Matthew has some that are unique to Matthew. For example, the parable of the 10 virgins, as they usually call it, waiting for the bridegroom. The parable of the sheep and goats. And Mark has some as well. Now John, interestingly, has a number of stories, but no really parables. This is part of John's distinction. But yes, Luke is a good place to focus because it's where most of them cluster. Parable of the prodigal son, only in Luke as well. So it's a great question. But yeah, we don't know any real Samaritans, and that ought to at least kind of give us some pause, even though apparently they're all good folks. They're good Samaritans, I guess. Although that very phrase, as you can see from the title, I'm going to challenge, that's not in the story. And for the hearers of Jesus, that would have been the last thing they would have said about a Samaritan. A good Samaritan? And I'll be expounding that a little bit. I think you've probably heard that and know that. But this is one of those cases where, man, we need to try as much as possible to hear as the first audiences would have heard and as Jesus would have told this. Because you say, well, why didn't he explain all of this stuff? Well, there's some things in the culture that you just don't have to explain. You introduce certain folks. If I talk today, for example, about the conflict between Jews and Palestinians, or Israel and Palestine, we would have a very quick understanding of what that means. That is very different than what it would be in the ancient world. But you don't need to define that every time you use it on the news or in conversation. It'd be the same way when you talk about Jews and Samaritans. Everybody clicks in and knows what's going on there. So with that sort of introduction in mind about how we need to try to hear this with some fresh ears. If you'll notice, just in the first place, and I don't want to spend a lot of time with this because I alluded to it some last week, in terms of how this parable is popularly heard, and we will go into the details, but I'm assuming most of you know it's basically about someone who gets robbed and beaten and left in a ditch on the side of the road. A couple of folks come by and don't help him, that we think maybe should. Then the Samaritan comes by and helps the poor guy. Puts him on his donkey, binds up his wounds, takes him to an end, and helps him convalesce and recover. That's in bowls. There are a few more details there. So, what's this about? Well, this is one of those parables where it's very common to provide that moral kind of reading. And there's nothing wrong with a moral reading. A moral reading is better than an immoral one. Okay? But remember we talked last week about Jesus' parables are not quite in Aesop's fables categorization in terms of you tell this story and then and the moral of the story is, and it reduces down to a nice point. I think that we have a tendency to do that, and with this one it typically is something like the moral of the story is be a good neighbor, be helpful. And that word neighbor, I'm going to keep coming back to in various ways, is a key word. Being a good and helpful neighbor, particularly to those in need. And that's a great point. But it really just skims the surface, I think, of what Jesus is talking about here. And on the level of, I love Mr. Rogers. Bless him and may he rest in peace. I used to have cardigan sweaters that looked like this until my wife said it was not really a very cool look. And but Mr. Rogers just and I can't do the accent very well, but hello neighbor. Just be a nice neighbor, be nice and helpful, just like the Good Samaritan. Yeah, be neighborly. Well, and some of you remember the Robert Fulton book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten or something, and share your toys. Yeah, and that's useful. Our society would be a lot better if we were a little bit more civil. And no one can forget the, State Farm commercial. Like a good neighbor. Yeah, oh, sure. And then so it's like, well, isn't that nice? And Jesus tells that kind of story. And so we just kind of, again. And the moral of the story, a wee too simple and not at all. Remember we talked about, there's typically a punch. And not just a punch line where we go, but a sort of punch in the face line. And so that may challenge us a little bit to be more helpful in that, but that's not really very, very punchy, is it? Then the other very popular reading, although not so much today, I did allude to it last week, but I thought I'd just lay it out for you, because this is a classic example of an allegorical reading in the history of interpretation by someone as illustrious as Augustine, who I think is a bit off base here, but was a first-rate theologian, so this is not a judgment about all of his thought. But an allegorical interpretation was very common, saying, well, yeah, sure, it's about being nice, but it's more than that. At least there's a realization that there's got to be something to that. But here is a tendency to be, should we say, a tad more spiritual, which is a very good word, but you can, and I think you probably know where I'm coming from, we can actually be a little too spiritual for Jesus sometimes, which I know sounds counterintuitive. But there is, and these parables in particular are rooted in the world and on the ground, and not in some heavenly realm in that kind of ethereal sense. But it was very common, and you can just see Augustine said, oh yeah, we've got all these bits and pieces, but this means this means this, and so forth. The man in the ditch who gets robbed, that's Adam. Okay? It's not that he wanted to give him a name, it's useful, but we're talking about Adam as in the Adam at the beginning. The sinful humanity, the fallen Adam. Then I'm not sure who the robbers are. I don't think I listed that. I don't remember what you said. Yeah, you could be demons, devils, sinful, whatever. But they're sort of left alone. But the priest and Levite who come by and who do not attend, well, this is a rather sort of anti-Old Testament view. That's the law and the prophets. Kind of get the law thing with the priests, but not quite sure about where the prophets come from there, but it's a way of referring to sort of, the Old Testament pattern. And then the Good Samaritan, who does that have to be, of course, the hero of the story? Well, that's Jesus. And I get Jesus is the one who saves and redeems, who helps. It's a wonderful point. Again, it really misses something big, however, in that Jesus, who is telling the parable, and he's not actually in the parable. In fact, it's fascinating. Jesus is really very rarely telling the story about himself, any of the parables. Now, he's telling these parables about the realm of God that he has come to proclaim and exhibit, but it's not a way of him promoting himself, typically. And even the character of God, we'll talk about that in other parables a little bit. It is not always, where's God in this story? Well, it's about the kingdom of God, but God's not necessarily in the story. But by the way, Jesus historically, of course, was a Jew. And so to make Jesus the Good Samaritan when he's a Jew is something's a little perhaps off there. Then it gets really fun. Jerusalem, all the travelers are going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jerusalem is somehow paradise or heaven. And I guess that's because Jesus came from heaven to here. And then the inn, that's the church, where we welcome the sick and the wounded, and all that's good. And then, and I did comment on this, where it just really gets, if I might say so, Brother Augustine, a little silly. But the 2 coins that are given to pay the innkeeper, he says, are either faith and love or Peter and Paul. Well, yeah, she said that, not me. Yeah. And fine, and you get where he's going with that, and I rather irreverently, since the tone has already been set, joked last week that, you can just come up with a pair of anything. Captain and Tennille, Sonny and Cher, whatever. I mean, and that's, I mean, obviously Peter and Paul is a little bit better. So, yeah, there is that common, it's interesting how we either go too simple or historically, no, it's got to be deeper, but it's got to be deeper in this other kind of way. I want to suggest a third way, which is an earthier way, a more social way, a more sort of political way, but I think maybe is truer to what Jesus was all about. Now, let's start with the context. And this is something that's often forgotten because these parables are so rich as individual stories, and Jesus may well have told them several times. But they come to us, this is the only place we have it, in a particular narrative context where Luke is setting this up, and I think this is very possibly historical, that this is actually how it went down. I can't prove that. But Luke is saying we need to understand this story in light of a conversation that takes place. And I do want to read this. It's important to see these contexts and not let them just be free-floating stories out there as they've tended to be. It's verses 25 through 29. And you can either follow along or just listen to it. It's the introduction, and this is the setup. Okay, Jesus tells a story in response to a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. All right, now this lawyer is not our sort of modern lawyer. And I'm just going to be commenting a little bit, and the outline will reinforce this. This would be an expert in Jewish law, in the Torah, so someone who's very devout and faithful in teaching. Perhaps a Pharisee, although that is not mentioned, but this is not meant to be a derogatory term. I know we all have almost as many lawyer jokes as Baptist preacher jokes. Okay, I got that. And there are probably some lawyers in the room, so you can share my pain. This is not, this would be an expert in Jewish law. Well, someone who's a teacher, who we ought to respect. And he comes to Jesus to test him. Now we go, but that doesn't necessarily have to be he's trying to undermine Jesus. No, he recognizes in Jesus, here's someone who's talking about the law as well, and so we want to have a good debate. He doesn't have to be sinister, as I think sometimes we indicate. And he says, teacher. Okay, he recognizes. He said, well, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That's a pretty big question. He goes right for the big stuff, doesn't he? And he, that is Jesus, said to him, well, what's written in the law? You're a lawyer, and again, we're talking about the Jewish law. What do you read there? And he answered, oh, well, I don't have time to go into all of it. The Torah, it's 5 books of the Torah. It's kind of long, but you can summarize it this way. And this is the lawyer answering. This is not Jesus. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Have we heard that before? Yeah. In other Gospels, Jesus is actually going to be the one to say all of the law is summarized in those 2 big things. One from Deuteronomy 6, thou shalt love the Lord your God with everything you have. And then the other from Leviticus 19, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That kind of covers it all. If you're loving God with everything you have and you're loving your neighbor as yourself, that's going to get at the heart of things. Now, obviously it needs to be talked about more, but that's a great place to start. And then verse 28, Jesus answered him. He said to him, you've given the right answer. Okay, I mean, they're just about ready to hug here. I mean, this is a great, no, they're getting along very well. This is not a drag down debate. Oh, you're not right. No, just, you gave the right answer. Do this, and you will live. Okay, these are not just nice words, but it's love and action. Great. Now, verse 29. But I do want us to see that there is this congenial exchange. It's about trying to understand the law and put it in practice. That's the setup. But now verse 29, wanting to justify himself. There is perhaps a touch of the pride there, or simply wanting to say, look, the one of these two, loving God with everything we have, I kind of understand that. It's this loving your neighbor as yourself. That one I need a little bit of help with. We all do, because it's how do we understand that? And here the big question is, who is my neighbor? Okay, all in favor of loving your neighbor. Okay, amen. Okay, that's good. But you got to then decide who is in the neighborly circle. Is that everybody? And it becomes a conflict between insiders and outsiders. And this would be very common for folks then and now. I know we can easily say, oh, we should love everyone. But where is this neighborly responsibility? And typically, it would start with, of course, one's family, one's extended community. And then in this context, it would not be at all uncommon for, a fellow keeper of the law, a fellow Israelite. Now you start talking about the Romans who are ruling over us, and that gets a little dicier. Now I'm filling out the questions here, but he's actually, okay, who is this neighbor thing? Is it my own people, folks like me? And we don't know all that's behind the question, but that's the loaded question. And then immediately after that, Jesus starts telling the parable. The parable is the answer to this question. And I think it's important to realize that. Now, it won't be until after Jesus tells the story that he's going to come back and say, oh, all right, which one was the neighbor? He doesn't use the word neighbor in the story, but it's all about who. It's all about the circle of neighborly concern, which seems like a very simple thing, but that's where it starts getting, as we get into it, that's where the twists and turns come. Who is my neighbor? All right, well, let's just get into the story then. All right? And again, I'm just going to sort of go through this, and then really, and you can sort of follow along with the outline as well. It's a series of characters. I joked before about, you got a priest and a rabbi and so forth. It's very much that same kind of thing. We start with Jesus replied, verse 30. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He just, the Greek says, it's just certain man, nobody particularly special. We don't know the socioeconomic standing of this person. It could be anyone, just a traveler, although the context of the story certainly assumes that this is a Jewish man. We're in Jewish territory. Jesus, the Jew, is talking to a Jewish lawyer. Most of the people, if not all in the audience, would be Jews. So, one of us, you all know that road. Okay? I-95 running from Richmond to D.C.? Okay? Not the safest road always. One should actually pay attention when one is on 95. All right? The accidents have. This was kind of a dangerous road too. Okay? The road from Jerusalem, it says going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Actually, it's kind of going up northeasterly, but you do know in biblical topography and such, anywhere from Jerusalem is down. Oh, it is. And it's actually very important. Jerusalem is the apex of the world. And it is on a mountain, but it's not Mount Everest, but still it's in the central location. So you're always going down from Jerusalem if you're leaving it, or you're going up to Jerusalem. In fact, if you somehow were on Mount Everest in Nepal or wherever it is, and were going to Jerusalem, you would still be going up. Yeah, in biblical thought. So we're going away, traveling, been in Jerusalem, maybe to worship, to do whatever, going back home or to do business or whatever. And, we all know this kind of road stuff happens. What happens here? Fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. It's a very crisp story, but you get the picture real fast. This guy's in bad shape, that phrase, half dead, is a literal translation. We would say just on the brink of death. Certainly someone looking could assume that they were dead. I mean, he's on his last leg. Interestingly, and we don't need to belabor this, but to get the characters right, the word robbers, and I think some versions have thieves or whatever, actually is, and I do have this on the outline, is the Greek word leistes, that actually is used for the two criminals that wind up on the cross next to Jesus. It's a word that can mean more than just, somebody robs a house because they need money or whatever. It actually carries the nuance of rebellious political activity. And now, again, we don't have a great motivation here, and that's, we want to be careful about not to overdo things that are not in the story. But there really was a problem in the ancient world, well, it depends on your perspective, because this was a time of oppression under Roman rule. There were all kinds of rebellious groups popping up, all kinds of freedom fighters, and possibly here, these robbers, that word would apply to those who were some kind of rebel movement. Now, they could still have been common thugs as well, but, and I suggest a bit tongue-in-cheek, robbing the rich to, sort of a Robin Hood type even. Now, we don't have any indication that this man in the ditch was some kind of political oppressor or super rich or anything like that. So we don't need to go too far with that, but it is an interesting, there could be within this world that Jesus is creating more than just, somebody got mugged. On this dangerous road, or somebody was fixing, in our term, fixing a flat tire, and somebody came, beat them and took their wallet and that sort of stuff just because, well, that's just the kind of person they are. There's already a bit of a political hint that this is the kind of world we're living in where there's violence. Jesus is not approving that, of course, but violence because of political oppression against all sorts of people. And I think the audience would recognize, oh, yeah, we're never quite sure who to trust. Everybody says, oh, I'm a rebel and I'll free you, and but they're also, they're very violent and they're not helpful. That may be a little bit of what's going on there, just to give a little bit more texture to the story. But then, of course, our main characters come by. And it's, first of all, a priest and a Levite. And they're really just kind of variations on the same thing. These would be representatives of the temple cult in Jerusalem. Not a high priest, not a chief priest, but just you had a whole rank and file group of priests who would attend to sacrifices and whatnot. And the Levites were the priestly tribes. Some sort of call them junior priests or the wider staff. I don't think we need to parse that too much. These would clearly, however, be characters that the lawyer would kind of relate to. Now, the lawyer himself was not a priest, but there would certainly be an expectation that the priest and Levite would know the Jewish law, would know, as every Jew would know, as every Christian should know, loving God with everything you have and loving your neighbor as yourself is kind of a baseline. Okay, that's pretty foundational to biblical ethics and morality and values and such. You don't need all 10 commandments, that gets them. So here are law-abiding officials at some level. Again, rank and file, not some particular high priest who we know is just a selfish so-and-so, but just, no, they come and they see, the language is very clear here. Let me read it carefully. Verse 31, now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, so there's no letting the guy off the hook. That, well, I was just so busy I just didn't see. Oh, no. I see this man in the, I always put him in a ditch. There's no ditch in the story, but you get the idea. On the side of the road, seems to be like you should be in a ditch, and having fun at this poor man's expense. But I see him. Okay, so there's that connection and recognition, as we would see an accident on the side of the road, of course. And see it all the way, the whole rubbernecking thing. But he sees, and he then deliberately passes by on the other side. I mean, Jesus tells it so crisply, but you get the picture. The expectation of one who would think, I should love my neighbor. Who is my neighbor? That guy. I don't think so this time. Yeah. Now, whether all that was being processed or not, we have no idea. But by his action, his unneighborly action, he was clearly saying, this guy, no. And he is certainly in need of neighborly assistance, but he is not within my circle, however that is being viewed. And for whatever reason, I'll come back to that in just a second. The Levite, and we get a second chance here, maybe he'll be better. Almost exact same language. When he came to the place and saw him, again, that seeing recognition, he passed by on the other side. I mean, that just hauntingly vivid seeing and then just deliberately, a deliberate act of not tending. Now, the next thing is then, and a Samaritan comes. But I have heard, as likely you've had, I have heard more sermons that fill in more information about this priest and Levite. Because inquiring minds want to know, as we expanded the robbers a bit, why did this priest and Levite not attend? What was their motivation? Okay, we and particularly in our more sort of psychologically oriented society, you want to know what makes people think, why did you do this? We're reeling with this, are we not? From the international news, why did that pilot, for goodness sake, do what he did? We see the action, we're horrified by it, but we want to know motivation. And of course, everybody's scrambling to find news and such. I don't know that we'll ever know exactly. So I get that. But sermons about why did the priest and Levite, and it runs the gamut, although most of what I've heard is really piles on their hyper purity consciousness. You've heard this, haven't you? That, oh, well, they are so fastidious in their keeping of the other parts of the law. So they don't want to defile themselves. And everybody knows, if you read the Jewish law, that contact with a dead body renders you unclean. And usually, and they don't know that he's dead, but remember, he looks half dead. And so, but if we went over and, hey, buddy, I'm unclean, and I'm a priest, and I can't have that. Okay? Well, I get that. I've heard more sermons about purity and impurity, mostly because I've preached a lot of them. and taught a lot of. This is what, growing a little older and becoming mature, it's a really mixed bag. You grow, but you look back and you go, oh, sweet Lord, did I do that? Did I say that? Yeah, and don't get me going, because it's much worse than, I've had a long journey. And in South Texas in Baptist life, I've been preaching since I was 8 years old. It's not, I don't know. But yeah, no, I mean, this was, because, and Jesus breaks the boundaries of, he's not purity conscious, and these Jewish leaders and blah, 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 blah. And of course, these are kind of stand-ins for the lawyer who himself is, not really wanting to deal with those who might be unclean. And, well, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I'm still growing in this. A number of Jewish scholars have helped with this. First of all, there's not a word about purity in this story. There's not a word about their motivation. So I do think we need to just say this is who it is. Yes, please.
It seems to me sort of interesting that nowadays, and I don't know when it came into being, but that we have a Good Samaritan law. Because it used to be that if you helped somebody and something happened,
the whole litigious,
you were liable to sue. And now, if you help somebody and something happens, if you've done it voluntarily and without any recompense, then it's okay.
Yeah, I would want to check with my lawyer about that. No, I mean, you actually are bringing in and that is a kind of equivalent of legal concerns that may be in these folks' minds. And it is kind of like, if I help, but if I move them, and that by moving them, I actually do kill them, and then.
What was the law back then?
Well, in terms of this kind, there wouldn't be those levels of law about being liable for because
helping somebody.
Yeah, no, that would not have been the problem. I do think, though, there could be some, should we say, fastidiousness about this clean and unclean, but. It's not really here, and a couple of things, I don't want to dwell too long on this because I want to get to what's really the punch, and it's just interesting to me, again, how we sometimes miss the punch by focusing on something a little bit more minor. Just assuming, they did touch the body, and the body was dead, and they would be unclean. There's much more of a, unclean for 7 days. You then wash, and during those 7 days you can't go serve in the temple, but you're not branded as evil. To be unclean is not to be evil in Jewish society. And I know we use words like unclean and impure, and we immediately do, that makes them sinful. That's not it at all. This is just simply part of the order of things, and particularly when, just in this case, when you handle someone on the brink of life and death, that's handling the sacred. God is the God of life and death. And so this sense of, if I come in contact there, then that's a place where I need to be aware of the holiness of God. And so there's a time of separation, but it's not I look at you and I know you can't go to the temple because you touched a dead body. And I'm going to pass by because I'm not going to touch you. And, it's like you've got this big death sign over you. Now, a couple of things. One is, people have to touch dead bodies. That's how you bury them. And burial is taken very seriously in Jewish society. Yes, they would be unclean, but all of that was simply recognizing that it's a mysterious moment, it's a sacred moment. Also, the direction of travel for these two, it seems to be, it's not absolutely clear, but the movement is away from Jerusalem. they had already done their weekly, monthly service in Jerusalem. So the only thing that would keep them from certain, they couldn't serve in the temple if they touched an unclean body, but they'd already done that. That would not be the issue here. So I'm not sure that's a useful way to get into this story. Yes, please.
There's been some research replicating the story of the Good Samaritan.
Oh, very nice, yeah.
And they did it with could be a population of seminary students.
I know. Go ahead.
And the man was in a doorway, and he was disheveled, etc. And the people who passed by were running late for a Bible study.
Yep. That's brilliant. Yeah, and these are pretty sophisticated psychological studies. I want to say Princeton, but I'm not sure. You're absolutely right.
I can't quote.
Yeah, and I've read them recently in 2 or 3 places, and that I need to incorporate that into this talk. It's brilliant.
So it could have been a Presbyterian running late for a session.
There you go. I appreciate you, unlike my friend here, I appreciate you not going for many things that Baptists could be running for. Again, in my background, we'd be running to save some lost soul. Okay, to hand them a track and that sort of thing. And we're not, the guy's dead anyway. He's either in heaven or hell, so what are you going to do now? But no, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's, again, if you want motivation, and I think Jesus purposely leaves it open, I think we're closer, and that the very interesting psychological studies having been done on this, this is just, I got things to do. Now, I also think, and thought more about this too, I think there's a fear factor in this story, unlike the example, because they were just asking folks on a seminary campus. This is a dangerous road, and if these are robbers are around, it's a politically tense, you stop and help someone, these guys could still be lurking in the bushes. And could come after you. And fear factor is always there for us, I think. What if it's late at night on the side of the road, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, and we could speculate about this. I actually like your example the best. I think that's perhaps more challenging to us. And how, what really trips us up from what we say is the root of the law, loving one's neighbor, but only if I'm, if my schedule permits. So thank you for that. Yeah. So you have this wide range of stuff. You can go, yes, but we could focus on motive or not. No. That it's the next thing. And a Samaritan comes by. Okay. Now we know where this is going. Okay. But you need to realize Jesus would not. I'll just go ahead from the get-go here. The second Jesus would have uttered that word, priest, Levite, and people go, oh yeah, I know a priest and Levite who probably who didn't help me as much as they should, but I know also a good priest. Yeah, and a Samaritan. Okay, you really do need to hear the boos and the hisses in the audience. I think Jesus would have had to pause. And a Samaritan, boo. Okay, all expectation would have just been, and I'll unpack this a little bit, but yeah, this is not just, a third party came by who wasn't a priest and Levite. I think that's how we often do it. We so pick on, there's something about these Jewish religious leaders and they're hypocrites, and we all know that any of us can be hypocrites, and it's easy to pick on religious leaders, sometimes even most in our own traditions. And that's worth doing. But that's not really the point here. The point is, and this Samaritan, he came near, that's the first verb. Came, so didn't just see, that's coming next. He actually came near, okay, as opposed to passing. He came near, and he saw, okay, and, now again, I'm slowing this down. No, that's fair. And moved with pity, moved with compassion. And then they're going, and went to him and did stuff. And the whole bit about putting him on his donkey and washing his wounds and taking him to the inn. And actually, I'll repeat it rather than just poorly retelling it. Jesus did a pretty good job of telling us about the inn. Verse 34, he went to him, bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, which was the donkey, brought him to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay whatever more you spend. Woo! Now that's love in action, to put it mildly. I'm going to come back to that. But let's go back to the verbs, okay, and really slow it down. Oh, he came near and he saw him. And I do think they understand, and saw that here's a Jew in the, I'm going to keep him in the ditch if that's all right. I'll have that little bit of license. In the ditch, pretty bad shape, but what would be expected next? Okay, this is almost certain. The expectation would be, the next thing would be, he would kick him to see if he really is dead. Okay? And if he wasn't, he'd finish the job. Okay? Or, see if there were anything left to rob. Fillings in the teeth, gold fill, I mean, all that. No, I mean, seriously, this is the kind of image a Samaritan, that's what we expect from, but not all Samaritans. No, this is profiling. Okay, this is ethnic stereotyping. Okay, and it's not, this could be a good Samaritan. No, this is in Jewish territory, on this Jewish road, and this is like, he doesn't belong here. And in fact, he's probably the head of the robbing gang. I mean, he's just coming to see what kind of job they did. I mean, all of that is extrapolating, but that is truer to the tone of the story. And so when that is flipped on its head, he came near, he saw, and he moved with pity. And then all these actions that he does, that doesn't make sense. Now, why is that? Well, you know this, but let me just elaborate a little bit. Jews and Samaritans did not care for one another. They hated each other. These were, there was incredible antipathy between these two groups that happened to be very close, geographically and ethnically, but they were not identical. And there's no kind of fighting and hatred like fighting among those who are otherwise pretty close. All right, we see this all the time. Examples, and they're not perfect ones, but they'll get us going, Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. The whole former Yugoslavia, Bosnians and Serbs and all of that. I can't keep all that straight. And just to be really almost too close for comfort, Jews and Palestinians in the modern day Middle East. Okay, now, trying some negotiation, we'll see. But, and then to say nothing of Jews and Arabs and, of course, Palestinians would be Arabs. But we can go on and on with this kind of thing. In the ancient world, what were the problems? Real quickly. Okay, I usually just kind of rattle through, but it will help us. There was a racial component, okay, and I put that in quotes because actually, if you physically saw a Samaritan or a Jew, you wouldn't know the difference unless there was some kind of dress difference. But in the large history, there were at least possibilities of, here was the slur. See, and all you need is the slur, whether it's reality or not. Jews typically call Samaritans half-breeds. Right? Half Jewish and half Gentile, going back 8 centuries before. They're the result of the mixture with the ancient Assyrians and Jews, but they're not really pure Jews. Now, the Samaritans would not agree with that. Okay, they worship the God of Israel. They regarded themselves, they didn't call themselves Jews, but as true Israelites. Okay, so, but, it happens on the playground with 8-year-olds of exactly the same race and everything else, but if they start not liking each other, pretty soon somebody's mama is going to come into the conversation. It's some kind of origin, some kind of ethnic slur. And that went back and forth. There was also a serious spatial difference. They worshipped at different sacred sites. Jerusalem, of course that's in this story, is the Jewish center, obviously, the temple and all of that. Samaritans worshiped God on Mount Gerizim and had a temple there in recent time to what we're reading here until a Jewish king at the time tore it down. And which does not make for good relations, by the way. Okay, and Mount Gerizim is in the Bible. Which leads to the third thing. There was a scriptural difference. Not that somebody had some way out. The Samaritans looked to the same Torah that the Jews did. They had their own version, They edited a little bit of it that accentuated the role of Mount Gerizim, but otherwise, all the same stories about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the law, and all of this kind of thing. But with the different worship places, little different Bible version, ethnic tension. That's just all a little too real, isn't it? But meant for, antipathy. The key story that sets this up is at the end of Luke chapter 9. When Jesus is starting this long journey that he takes to Jerusalem. And he just wants to stay for a while. Samaria was between Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem. So it was natural to you had to go through Samaritan territory. Now you need to be a little careful. He just wanted to stay the night. He wasn't planning on preaching, wasn't planning on teaching. He says he sent some of his representatives into a Samaritan village to say, I'd like to stay here a while. And they say, no, you're not welcome. Okay, you and your group of Jews are heading to Jerusalem. No vacancy here. There's no big surprise there. Okay, so we go. Oh yeah, these Samaritans. They're just mean and nasty, and they hate the Jews. Oh, but do you remember? Just to get the other side of it, Jesus' two great disciples, James and John. You remember what their response was to this rebuff? Oh Lord, how dare they? Can we play Elijah? We've been wanting to do this. Now we got a good chance. Can we call down fire from heaven and burn the whole city? No. And Jesus said, I don't think so. Now, we do some Elijah stuff. That Elijah stuff we don't do. And we move on. But already, that's only in Luke. But you see that tension there. And then it's not but 20 verses or so later that Jesus is telling this story. And you see all of these things. This Samaritan is doing, we just cannot believe. This becomes not just an example of loving one's neighbor, although I'm going to come back to this, but it's loving one's enemy. And then how does he do it? Now, it's not so much a story about how, but it is quite incredible. And this may be a twist that you haven't heard. It's a little bit new to me, but it just adds to. It's more about who than how, and I'm going to come back to that in concluding in just a minute. But there is this is a marvelous. He doesn't just call 911, whatever the equivalent of that would be. Okay, he devotes his time, his resources, his money, all right, taking this guy to an end, and then leaving his credit card, for goodness sake, saying, I'm going to come back, put it on my tab, whatever this guy needs. This is incredibly generous, but may even be more so in one of these lovely Jesus, almost ridiculous modes. This is really what we would call foolish action. While we're worried, I want to help people, but we got to do it properly and social services. Ends at this time. It's such a basic thing, but it's a fairly recent in my study for some reason. I see Ann, and it says it's Holiday Inn. It's just got to be because it's not, and this is not the Ritz, but it's probably the Holiday Express. Okay, fine. But it's just got, and you don't think anything about it. It's just kind of gets a room for the night and whatnot. No. When you travel, okay, and there was a good bit of traveling going on, and the Romans kept the roads pretty safe, and this one was a little dicier. But, you typically stayed in people's homes that you knew or that were offering hospitality because inns were more like...
We had a guy speak to our Kiwanis Club recently.
Oh, yes.
Who traveled along a road in Israel and tried to travel many, many miles, like 70 or 80 miles.
Yeah.
And he found that there were no inns in the small towns.
That's even modern.
Was 2 years ago.
Yeah, okay. No, very interesting.
It was only by virtue of the internet that he could find some people that would open that would offer their home. That he could have found it if he'd had more time, but to quickly find a home, he needed the internet.
And that is much more, this whole hospitality thing is much more the Middle Eastern way. If I can speak very broadly. Yeah, no.
He stayed in the bedroom with the guy once, and he slept on the floor, and he...
Which, now again, I would be, I could be more scared of that than I would be, because again, just the way you're raised and all this.
Ago.
But at this time, an inn would be more like a brothel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it would, now we really got his attention. He was, just kind of a shady place. Not exactly, greatest, just kind of, And you say, well, he should have. Well, but he did what he can. Remember, he's in strange territory here. Okay, but that, I want you to see it from the perspective of the Samaritan. We're assuming that still the guy at least has a bed and all this. But you go to that kind of place and give them your credit card and say, I'll be back and whatever he needs, just put it on my tab. I mean, that is a ridiculously foolish business decision to go to a shady operation like that and just say, look, I want this guy to be helped, whatever it takes, and you just charge it to my account. I mean, but I think there's something, I don't think it's the main point, but that Jesus is telling a story that's making people go, that's what it means to love your neighbor as yourself? I'm going to go back to just kind of, when they're sick, I make a really good soup. My tomato soup is lovely, and I take the tomato soup, and it makes them feel better, and I keep the law, and I feel great. And this is a little bit more than that. Oh, let's get to the punchline. Say we're not at the punchline yet. Jesus actually says something. He comes back to the lawyer, okay, and he says, okay, we got these three characters, but it's interesting. He says, which one of these? This is how he words it. Which one of these was the neighbor? Priest, Levite, Samaritan. Okay. Well, I mean, it's obvious what the answer is. Okay. Who is my neighbor? Okay. Which one was the neighbor? Oh, well, we'd say it's the Samaritan. Of course. So he's the one who acts neighborly. But but it's still, Jesus puts the emphasis more, who acted like a neighbor. But if you'll notice in the text, or I'll just say, the guy does not give the simplest answer, which would just be, oh, the Samaritan. He comes back with saying, oh, and it's almost like he just starts, oh, he cannot say it. The one who showed him mercy. He describes the action. Oh yeah, the one, and actually the verb there is the one who did mercy, or the one who did the neighborly thing. He focuses on the action, which is proper, but Jesus is still doing the who thing. Who is the neighbor in this story? And by doing that, Jesus connects all of this together. So what does this mean? He says, go and do likewise. Right? Oh, so we're supposed to go and do like the Samaritan. Well, that's right, yes. We should help neighbors, even if they're different than us. But it's even stronger than that. Because by setting up, who is my neighbor? Oh, Samaritan. That also puts Samaritan in these other cases. Remember the guy starts up, who is my neighbor? Well, I just told you a story and you just answered. Well, you couldn't quite get it out, but you still know the point. You answered, who is my neighbor? Oh, it's a Samaritan. So, love your neighbor means love a Samaritan. It's a subtle little flip, but it only, if you will, drives the knife a little deeper. It's one thing to say, oh, great Samaritan. Well, listen, I guess there are exceptions to everything. He's nice and he loves his enemy. No. Jesus is not so subtle in making the point. I want you all to imagine in the audience, if it were a Samaritan in the ditch and you were coming along, your responsibility would be to help him. He is the neighbor who is to be loved as much as he's the one who gives the example of love here. So Jesus does not leave any wiggle room for leaving the Samaritans out, as the Samaritan did. Our time's about gone. You've made helpful comments along the way. Is there any kind of quick further response? Yes, please.
I was just thinking further on what he did. Obviously, it was a long trek to walk from where he was going, and he was riding a donkey.
Or some animal,
so
yeah.
He gave up his comfort.
No. Oh, no.
By putting the
Oh, yeah. All of that, it really is just that series of, the longest part of the parable, it's really a very short one, but the longest part is given to the extensive action that the Samaritan does. So it winds up being an incredible illustration of what it means to love, but the focus is still on the who, and I'm still also just, the more I think about it, this is such extravagant love. Again, he gives up his comfort and time. Those make good stewardship sermons. Taking someone to a brothel and giving them the credit card, I'm overdoing it. That's kind of, it's like, oh my Lord, this guy just goes from loving to foolish. But Jesus is saying, look, if we're really at the heart of what God is about here, It's giving this kind of extraordinary care to those who would be our sworn enemies. Now, I can say this. I'm not any closer than any of you all to doing this. Please.
Well, isn't there a backside of the story where he's
Go ahead.
also pointing out that if the question was, how do I inherit eternal life, that the answer here is that by doing this, you may be closer to eternal life than the priest who walked past.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. No, really, that leading question. Oh, and we've been joking about Baptists and such who've typically been, and again, our tradition is somewhat more narrowly evangelistic. We know the answer to who gets eternal life just like that. Okay, you receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you know, not by works, but by, and you all have. I think you all have the. The faith and grace is pretty good for you guys too. This is like, I mean, this gets real close to what that awful phrase that my Lutheran friends just break out in hives. But Baptist too, of almost works, right? Yeah, you, and I think faith is involved here, but it's faith that works out in love, and I actually love the way you put it. Yeah, you are closer to the realm of God. The realm of God does this kind of stuff. God wastefully gives of himself. Now I can bring in Jesus real fast. I'm happy to do the Augustine thing. I just don't like the way he does it. I mean, Jesus is the extravagant giving of everything that doesn't make sense, including dying on the cross. Yeah, and that is the way of God. And yeah, we love talking about eternal life and, because the old spiritual something, all those talking about heaven ain't going there. A lot of talk about heaven, but, and I don't know that this is, I think eternal life is a broader concept. And now, where am I going? Up or down? It's about the very life of God.
But I guess a subtle attack on the law, the principles of laws.
I think attack, and again, I'm a little hesitant to, because it's attack, not attack on the law, because it's actually, Jesus is love God and love your neighbor. It's attack on those who ought to be practicing the law and aren't. It's an indictment of all of us who speak a better game than we do. And that would be indicative of the priest and Levite. It's actually, though, and this again, it's this whole law and gospel thing that we do, Jesus is more integrated with this. This is actually about, he loves the law. He just says this is what it means. And I wish he just stopped. Do you love your neighbor, Spencer? Yeah. Well, the one on the right, my left, the guy he never keeps his dog.
He doesn't deserve it.
No, I don't care for him so much. But basically, I'm a pretty good neighbor. Okay, I do. Mow my yard and do my thing, keep it myself. Yeah, I can do that. But then we start. If this is what that means, whew. Yeah, we're in a whole different. Yes, I've been.
You're batting 500 at least.
That's good. You guys are great. Thanks. And timing wise, I'm bad.
No class next Sunday, remember. Pick it up in 2 weeks.
Okay.